Amen. Well, I appreciate being invited back to Love Assembly Baptist Church. It is always good being here. And I am one of the things I'm most thankful for is just the familiar faces that I've seen here before. I like seeing faithfulness, and that's a huge blessing. I was looking at the anniversary pictures and just noticing a lot of the same faces in there. And that's good. That is what we need in church, is people to get behind the pastor and be faithful. And it's very encouraging. And I just appreciate the Ofuebus and their friendship, and we just love their family. How long has it been since the ordination? It's been 2 years?
Since 2021, so
it's almost 3 years, and in that time, Pastor Obi has not embarrassed me one time. I have not been ashamed at one time for laying hands on him, and he's been a great blessing. I did want to mention this too. At the new Old Paths Conference in Florida this year when he preached, man, I was so pleased with that message that he preached at that conference, because he told me the subject he was going to be preaching on. He was going to be talking about dispensationalism and stuff. And I remember I thought, man, in my mind I'm thinking, he probably wasn't the guy to ask to do that, just because he didn't come from that world like I did. And often people who didn't come from that world are often, I think, overly hostile towards the people, and you kind of get the wrong idea and misrepresent and all that. And so I thought, well, I hope this isn't like an over-the-top, rail session or something like that, But man, I mean, he nailed it in that message. He had the spirit of it right. He had the facts right, and I could just tell, man, he did a lot of study for this message. He just wasn't up there repeating talking points. I was like, this guy's just for real, and I like that. He's not just putting on. He is genuine, for real. And I just sat there in that message, and I was like, yep, I ordained that guy right there. I waited until after the message before I said that, but but no, I do. I definitely appreciate him. Good to have Lana with me. This is her first time getting to travel with me on a preaching trip, and so she's been very excited about this trip and getting to come out here. And very thankful to be here, and wish y'all were closer so our churches could fellowship more. But it is always a blessing to see you. But I am privileged to be here at the 5th anniversary, and so when I was thinking about what to preach for the 5th anniversary, and I save notes for all my sermons. I have literally all my sermons saved, the notes for them going back to the very first service. And I thought, well, I wonder what I preached at our church on our 5th anniversary. We are coming up on 13 years in our church, and so I thought, and this was in my mind. I was thinking about what I wanted to preach, and I wasn't at my office, and I couldn't remember what I preached. And I thought, what would be nice is if I look up the notes, and it's something that would be applicable for this church, and then maybe too, I will be able to now look back 8 years later and maybe add some things to it that I would have liked to have known, as a pastor going into those next years. And man, I went and I started reading these notes, and not only that it was like, yes, this is exactly what I was hoping for. This would be a good message to preach. But it also, again, now that I can look back over the last 8 years since that time, it actually, I really got a lot out of it personally that I am planning on taking home to our church and probably preaching a whole series of messages kind of inspired by this, now that I'm able to just kind of look back. And I'll probably say a little bit about that as we go. But I want to start off this message, though, in John 16:21. This was the text verse I preached back on our 5th anniversary. And it says, "A woman, when she is in travail, hath sorrow, because her hour is come. But as soon as she is delivered of the child, she remembereth no more the anguish for the joy that a man is born into the world." And the title of my message is A Comparison of Pastoring and Parenting, is what I titled that message. And I think we would all agree one of the greatest joys in the world is being a parent. I mean, without a doubt. But at the same time, I think we could also say it's probably one of the greatest challenges in the world. I mean, has anybody figured out how to make parenting easy? I see a lot of little kids in here. It's hard sometimes, isn't it? But at the same time, you wouldn't trade it for anything, would you? I mean, it's just a fantastic thing. Only women can understand the pain that, one has to endure childbirth. but yet they keep doing it. I mean, have you ever thought about that? I mean, they keep having kids. You know, my wife, when she's had some of our kids, she's had some, you know, difficult deliveries, and you know, and I'm watching as a husband, and I'm just like, man, you know, there's a couple times I was like, man, is she going to make it through this thing? And I remember in all of those situations, whenever she had kind of the rougher deliveries, I mean, I'm traumatized from all the pain that she's going through, and you know, and then all of a sudden the baby would be born, and they handed the baby, and there's you know, the relief and everything, and then I'm still like huffing and puffing, like, you know, all right, is everything going to be okay? And then she's just like talking to the nurses and just like everything's fine. And I remember with one of the kids in particular, I just wasn't expecting that. And I'm just like, why are you talking like nothing happened? You were just screaming in agony, you know, just minutes ago, seconds ago. I'm still traumatized and trying to process what just happened. And she's like, oh, this is great. And you know, and so it's like, you know, I remember those moments, and it's just like, why did she ever want to have another one? Again, I mean, 8 children we've had, and it was painful. It was painful every time. But again, like this verse says, while it is great sorrow, what comes from it is so great that you don't really think about it. You know, it's worth it. And so, you know, we live in a world with billions of people, and people continue having babies, and I think that is a great thing. I think that's a wonderful thing. But it's the same thing too, you know, when it comes to, you know, starting a church, when it comes to pastoring a church, there are great joys, but there are also great challenges at the same time. You know, about a year ago, you know, our church went through some battles that were difficult. And this is what was interesting about this message. These battles that we dealt with in our church, I saw it coming. In this message, I have it in the notes. It's the same notes that I use with some additional notes that I put in italics. But like, I called what was eventually going to happen, and I almost called the timing that it was going to happen at. It's like, how were you able to do that? Are you a prophet? No, I grew up in a pastor's home. I have many pastors in my family. I have many pastor friends, and you know what? We all deal with challenges. We all deal with battles. We all deal with difficulties, just like every mom. You know, you can all tell your war stories about when you had your baby and the things that you went through. It's what everyone deals with. And I remember while we were kind of in the midst of that battle, you know, there was also, you know, at my previous church, there were some battles. You know, there's always battles going on. And I was talking with my sisters. 3 of my sisters are married to pastors. And, you know, we were just all kind of sitting around complaining a little bit, you know, about ministry and all the agonies of it and things like that. And then we were just like, you know what? We grew up in a pastor's home. We knew this was going to happen. Why did we do this? You know, why did we? And it's, you know, it's like, you know, like ladies too. When you've had other kids and you start going through that labor, it's like, do you remember what happened last time? You know, but again, you do it anyway. You know, and too many times, I think we're trying to figure out how to avoid pain. We're trying to figure out how to avoid battles. But folks, if we don't go through the pain, if we don't go through the battles, we're not going to get the great moments. You know, ladies, if you just refuse to ever go through any pain, you're not going to have those kids. You know, pregnancy is difficult. Delivery is difficult. It's a painful thing, but it's definitely worth it. And so one thing too, you know, when it comes to starting churches, a line that I remember everybody kept telling me when I started our church, and because I had several pastors, you know, that knew me for years, and then when they found out I was going to start pastoring, you know, it was almost one of those things like, are you sure you want to do this? It's like, you know, and these are pastors, like, you know what this is like, don't you? You know, are you ready for it? And I was talking to one pastor, I remember he called me up before the opening of the first service. He called me that Sunday morning. He's like, hey, just wanted you to know I'm praying for you. And, you know, and he started talking, you know, and he's kind of giving you one of those talks, like, you know, sure you want to do this? You know, this is difficult. You know, he's like, you know, because he was going through some battles too. He was fighting battles. Everybody's fighting battles. And I remember he told me, he was just like, well, maybe it's better the way you're doing it. You start in a church, because he said, the reality is it's easier to give birth than raise the dead. And I never heard that before. I never heard that. And I, you know what? I've heard several pastors since then say that, because a lot of times I was like, man, it's hard starting a church. This is difficult. But then I've also heard from pastors, it's hard taking over a church. There's battles. And so no matter what way you spin it, there's going to be battles. You know, salvation is easy, but getting saved people to do what they're supposed to do, that's a real battle. Getting your own sorry carcass to do what it's supposed to do is a real battle. We're all familiar with Romans 7. It says in verse 18, "For I know that in me that is in my flesh dwelleth no good thing, for the will is present with me, but how to perform that which is good, I find not." We are all aware of what we are supposed to do. And we all know how to be a good husband, how to be a good father. The facts are laid out in the Bible, and they're not that deep. We all know how to be a good church member. We all know how to be a good Christian. We all know we're supposed to go soul winning. We all know the things we're supposed to do. But we struggle doing it. Why? Because we're sinful, because we have this sinful flesh. "For the good that I would, I do not. But the evil which I would not, that I do." I would never cause any problems in my church. Yeah, you probably would. You know why? Because you're sinful. I know you don't want to. "Now, if I do that, I would not. It is no more I that do it, but sin that dwelleth in me. I find in a law that I would do good, evil is present with me. For I delight in the law of God after the inward man, but I see another law in my members, warring against the law of my mind, and bringing me into captivity to the law of sin, which is in my members. O wretched man that I am, who shall deliver me from the body of this death?" And so when it comes to, being a good Christian, thank God for all the facts that we can learn from the preaching, from the reading of the Word of God, from our studying. But you know what? It's one thing to know what to do, and it's another thing to do it. And it's a completely different thing. I remember one of the dumbest decisions I ever made in my life was before we had our first baby, my wife talked me into going to a Lamaze class. And we didn't, and the classes were on Wednesday nights, and we were going to skip church for Wednesday night. So we had that you could go and do it all at once on a Saturday for I can't remember. It was supposed to be 6 or 8 hours. It felt like 115 hours. It was the longest, most boring. And they teach all these breathing techniques and stuff to help when you're going into labor and stuff. And so, I'm trying to be supportive and pay attention and learn all these things. I had to leave the room a couple times because they started showing deliveries. And I was like, I'm not watching that. I walked out. But anyway, it was a nightmare. And then my wife had we didn't do any of that stuff. Because the reality is you can learn, all right, breathe this way, do whatever, and I'm not going to explain to the ladies, you know better than me. But at the end of the day, when the pain starts, when the contractions hit, it's hard to stay focused. It's hard to do all those things. And we're all good at learning things that we're supposed to do as Christians, but when the battles come, when the pain hits, it's a different story. We can all go and try to learn boxing and watch videos and learn techniques and go use punching bags and exercise and do all these things, and we can get where we can tear that bag apart. But you know what? It's completely different when you have an opponent swinging back at you. It's easy punching a bag for a long period of time when you're not doing it with a bloody nose, when you're not doing it in pain because you got hit back. And that is, man, we all get fired up listening to preaching, learning things about the scriptures, learning facts, but it's a completely different thing when you get in the battle and you get hit back. When Satan hits you. When Satan uses your brother in Christ to hit you. And unfortunately, these things happen, and our behavior gets on. Most Bible doctrine is about behavior. Most time we think of doctrine as just the facts that we can learn, when it comes to salvation or prophecy, but sound doctrine is typically about behavior, about the kind of husbands that we're supposed to be, about the kind of fathers and just employers and all these things. It's all so important, but yet getting ourselves to do that is difficult. And as a pastor, this is where I want to kind of compare some pastoring and parenting. We can all learn the facts of what we're supposed to do, but it's a lot like parenting. The greatest parents in the world are people with no kids. They all know how they're going to discipline their kids, and their kids are going to obey and say, yes, sir, no, sir, yes, ma'am, no, ma'am. But again, then you have kids, and they have wills of their own. And so it's the same thing when you're going to go start a church. And, when our church started, and I'm sure it was the same thing with this one, and when I think about the birth of Liberty Baptist Church, you know what? There was a lot of praying that went into that. Just like a lot of you probably prayed that God would give you children before you had children. Now, when you prayed for those children, in your mind, you had an image of what it was going to be like parenting. You had an image in your mind of what those children were going to look like. And when a person that says, I want to start a church, they have an image in their mind of what that church is going to be like. And then also, and so there's, along with that praying, there's a lot of dreaming that goes on. You do. Dads, you picture that moment where you're, playing ball with your kids, and when you're teaching him how to do everything, and, and you picture those kids loving you and hugging you, and, all those beautiful moments. You dream. And as a pastor, you feel that you do the same thing. You dream. You've got a picture in your mind. You've got a picture of all these just wonderful IFB looking people who all sing praises to God and love the Lord and are spirit filled and are sowing and just doing all these things, and they support you fully, and they submit to the Word of God, and they submit to the leadership of the church. I mean, you have that image in your mind of these people. Just like as parents, you picture those kids. I'm going to sit down and I'm going to give them a full-blown Ward Cleaver, type of speech like he would always do to Wally and the Beaver, and they are going to be like, boy, Dad, you're right. I'm gonna obey you from now on. We picture all these things. There's a lot of planning. There's a lot of preparation that goes into starting a church, just as there is with becoming a parent. There's a lot of excitement, and sometimes too even some anxiety that comes with it. But then too, there is, so when it comes to the birth of these things, the starting of these things, a lot of praying, dreaming, planning, preparation, excitement, anxiety that goes into it. But then there's the reality of it. The reality of pastoring a church. Turn over to 1 Corinthians chapter 1, because I think about this verse often in my life. It says, because the foolishness of God is wiser than men, and the weakness of God is stronger than men. For ye see your calling, brethren, how that not many wise men after the flesh, not many mighty, not many noble are called, but God hath chosen the foolish things of the world to confound the wise, and God hath chosen the weak things of the world to confound the things which are mighty, and the base things of the world, and the things which are despised hath God chosen, yea, and things which are not, to bring to naught things that are, that no flesh should glory in his presence. Let me tell you something that I know, something that I understand from experience. One thing I found out when I started pastoring, I was 30 years old when I started pastoring our church. I had been in the ministry for a long time. I grew up in a pastor's home. I did Bible college courses. I read books on pastoring. I read books on church planning. I was as prepared as one can be. I was qualified, if you ask me. But you know what I found out when I started pastoring? I had no idea what I was doing. And you know what I've learned too, almost 13 years later? I still don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what I'm doing. People think that you know what you're doing just because you're doing it sometimes. People think, and this is always hilarious to me, but when people think that I know like maybe more than somebody else about something because like I have a little bit of a following on social media or something like that. It's like, man, that means nothing. Honestly, I'm telling you right now, I don't know the secrets. I don't know what I'm doing. One thing I've learned about parenting, and I've got children ranging from age 22 to 3. And again, so far, our adult children, I am thrilled with how they have turned out. But I'm not real sure how it happened. Because I've for sure made a lot of mistakes. And we didn't do things exactly as we planned. We had all kinds of plans and things, but at the end of the day, that's what you find out when you're parenting. You don't really know what you're doing. When Tommy was born, I remember, he wasn't eating like he was supposed to eat. Kids, and then, they get older, they don't behave like they're supposed to behave. They don't listen to mom and dad. They throw fits for no reason. Tommy held his breath all the time and would pass out every day. It scared us at first, but we finally got used to it. We'd put him in the church nursery, and we'd have to tell the nursery workers if he gets mad and he cries, he's going to hold his breath, and he's going to pass out. Don't panic. I'm like, what are we supposed to do? As soon as you start seeing him hold his breath, this is what we would do. We would take him and we would lay him down on the ground. And so he wouldn't fall over and hit his head. And then he'd and then he'd pass out, and then he'd come to a little bit later, and he was fine. So he didn't do it. When a kid's screaming and holding his breath, what can you do at that point? I remember we took him to the doctor. We're like, man, he's passing out all the time. Is he going to get brain damage or something like that? And I'm like, no, he'll grow. It won't hurt him. And that's what they said. Just lay him down, make sure he doesn't fall and hit his head or something like that, and he'll eventually grow out of it. And last year he finally grew out. No, he eventually grew out of it. But we feel like terrible parents. Like, man, our kid throws a fit all the time. He passes out all the time. Every day. I remember one time, he got spanked. He got mad. He cried. He passed out. And usually he would wake up and he would, the brain damage made him forget what happened and why he was mad. And he was usually fine. But he remembered, and he started crying again. And then he held his breath again, and he passed out again. And again, he's turned out great. We could not be more pleased with him. But I have no idea how it happened, because he threw us all kinds of curveballs. Jason, well, he's another story right there. The challenges. Abby, our daughter, boy, you see the way she is right now. You would think she was a perfect child. She was rotten when she was little. And you know what? I'm thankful we got through it, because good night. You should be our youngest, Hannah. Boy, she's starting to get better. But if she would have been our first, I'd have been like, man, we need to just put her up for adoption. We're not fit to parent, because she was so rotten. But I knew, she's going to grow out. We're going to get through this. We're going to get through these things. And at the end of the day, one thing you find out when you start a church, you don't really know what you're doing. The church planning books did not cover everything I began to face. Some of these stories they have, I don't like to tell stories about stuff in our church, but this happened long ago, and these people have been gone long enough, and they cussed me out too after they left, so I can tell this story. But is it okay if I just talk to you and not preach Bible so much today? I'm trying to give some help and encouragement, all right? So, our very first converts, these people, they came the first Sunday after church. Man, that was a blessing and everything. And they're like, we'd like Bible. We don't have any Bibles. We like Bibles. And so I could have given them right then, but I was like, no, I'm going to bring them over to your house. I got their address because I thought this would give me a chance to witness to them. And so I took Bibles over to that house. I witnessed to them. I gave them the gospel. They got saved. They were thrilled. They were coming to all the services. They were our first baptisms that we had in the church. And I was the greatest pastor in the world. And that's what they told me. And I believed them. And I'm like, well, yeah, man, you guys, you're just the first. We're going to have a bunch more of you in here. But I do remember one night in church, we were having prayer requests and praises. And I remember she raised her hand. She said, and people are praising the Lord for stuff. She said, Pastor Tommy, I just want to praise you. And, and I kind of kindly, it's like, well, I didn't want to be mean, rebuke her, new Christian, and all that kind of thing, but I also didn't want to accept the praise. But I do remember when she did that, I'm like, uh-oh. And that never turns out good. When people praise you like that, it never turns out good. Long story short, she was cussing me out, not long after that. I did something she didn't like. I was the worst pastor in the world. Within a month, I went from being the greatest to the worst. And the reality was they were crazy. It was around that time too, and I didn't get prepared for this in Bible college. I was at a church planners conference, and man, our church, when we started out, we had a big crowd the first time. We had a really good start. So I'm at this church planners conference. I'm like, we started in September. This is October. I'm already an expert, And I'm telling everybody about our first service, and then I get a call from her husband. This is before I get cussed out and all that kind of stuff. And he starts telling me about their problems they're having. And literally, while he was on the phone, started talking about his wife. And she started going after me. And, and I accidentally knocked her down. And now she's accusing me of abuse. And I just feel so bad. I didn't mean to do it. And he just started screaming. He just screamed. What am I supposed to do? I got a grown man just screaming in terror on the phone because he feels so bad about what he did. And I was like, this guy's crazy. They were both crazy. I wasn't prepared for that. Nobody told me how to handle that stuff. And guess what? I didn't succeed. I failed. I don't know what ever happened to them. You know, they end up leaving the church. They're gone. First converts, failed them. You know, and it's like, nobody prepared me for this kind of stuff. You know what? We found the people that came through the church, they had a will of their own. They had a will of their own. They had sin natures. I had sin natures. They messed up. I messed up. I made mistakes. They made mistakes. And it's the same thing too when it comes to parenting. Those kids that are born, they're going to have a sin nature. They're going to have a lot of, you're going to reap a lot of things that you sowed in your own children. That was Jason's problem. Jason, the problem that he had is he takes after me. He was always doing stuff that I did growing up that I never told him about. I never taught him about those things. And it was like I almost felt like a hypocrite punishing him because it's like, he came by it honestly. It was like, I mean, it's in his DNA to act that way. But I never taught him that. You know, the rest of the kids, the problem is I'm reaping everything my wife sowed. But with Jason, I have to take the credit on that. But it's a challenging thing, and you're going to find out when it comes to pastoring a church, when it comes to being a part of a church, every member, when they walk into a church, they have a way that they think the church should act. They have a way they think the church should behave. And you know what? You're probably right. But they have a sin nature, you have a sin nature, and you mess it up all the time. We get it wrong all the time. And so the growth of our church, when we started, one of the things that happened, and just like when you're parenting, your kids start to grow. They grow out of those phases. I remember too, I remember when we had 3 in car seats at one time. It was just like, it was a pain to just go anywhere. 3 kids in car seats. And I remember when finally the boys, they got big enough where they didn't need car seats anymore. And then I remember too and then we had Chloe that ended up coming along, but then I remember we got to the point where we had a lot of kids that weren't in car seats and they could get their siblings buckled in their car seats. It was a great day. Yeah. Well, and some of you parents with younger kids, you're like, man, that's going to be awesome. It's a great day when you as a parent, you can say, all right, kids, let's go. And you just walk out to the vehicle and get in your seat. It's magical. I mean, it's a wonderful feeling when you're able to do that. But some of you got to lug car seats, and and then they fight it sometimes, and they scream. And then in the wintertime, they're wearing their coats that are so big, and you can't get it in there right, and you're trying to loosen it. Y'all know what I'm talking about. These are difficult things. And let me tell you, when you start a church, everything's difficult. When you're a new church, everything's difficult. Everything is a challenge. It's best when you feel like you have to do everything for everybody, and a lot of times you have to do literally everything. And it's not fun. It's not always easy. But you know what? As our church started to grow, and this is what I had in our notes, and this was the testimony of our church that was exciting for me as a pastor. As our church started growing, people started getting committed and getting involved. Because when you first go into church, when people first come into church, they're observing and watching and seeing, is this something I like? And so you almost feel like an entertainer sometimes. I mean, I felt like when I started the church, I'm just like a one-man show entertainer. I had to do everything. I had to lead the singing, and I had to do the preaching. I had to do everything. And it's like, you've got all these new people, you don't know their beliefs, you don't know much about them yet, but it's like, it'd be nice to have help. And then you feel like too, all these people that come and visit your church are like comparing you to the other bigger churches that have been around for years, that have all these programs and that have all this staff. And it's just like, how am I supposed to compete with that? And you'd have the people too, they would come in and they'd be like, do you have this program? Do you have that program? It's like, your church should do this, or your church should do that. I was like, well, I agree. Our church should do that. Here's the problem. We have to have help. I can't do it all. And we have to have money. Y'all ain't giving no money. And but that is, people, when they would come into church, there was this expectation that you be like all the big churches. Well, that's impossible. We're a newer church. You know what needs to happen when you have a newer church? You need people to come in and to get involved. You need them to participate. You need them to contribute. You need them to help. And you need people to start taking ownership and responsibilities. And it was a great day for me as a pastor when I started looking out in our services and I started seeing things happening in our church. When I started seeing things getting done in our church and I wasn't doing it. It's a great feeling. It's kind of like when you can teach your boy how to mow the grass. I mean, we all want our grass mowed, right? We just don't want to do it. And isn't it great when you can say, son, grass, and then and it gets done. It's a wonderful feeling. You don't have to do it like that and be rude, but again, at the same time, it's a great feeling. And as a pastor too, it's not that I want to order people out. I like serving. I like doing. I like seeing things get done. The problem is, I'm one man. I can only do so much stuff. But the reality is, if people in the church will get involved, if they will grow, if they will be committed, if they will be submissive, if they will have some humility, I can plug them in different areas and our church can be accomplishing more. We can be doing more to edify people. We can be doing more to reach people. But as one man, I can only do so much. Pastor Obi, he's only one guy. He can only do so much. He can only be in one place at a time, by the way. I haven't learned the superpower of being in multiple places at one time. But it's a great thing when your church starts growing and all of a sudden as a pastor, you're not doing everything. That was one of the things at this point in our church we were seeing. People started getting emotionally attached to the church. That's a great thing too. You know, one thing that's exciting as a parent too is when your children start loving you back. Because, I mean, before they're born, you love them. I mean, before they're born, you just adore those children. And then, you know, moms, you get loved sooner by those babies. I mean, babies, you know, they automatically are going to love moms real fast when they're eating from and all that. But as dads, it usually takes us a little bit longer to start getting love. But when you start seeing those smiles from the little kids, when you start getting those hugs and the I love yous from those kids, it means a lot. Because you love them dearly, and when you love somebody, you want them, and they love you back, it's a great feeling. You know, you as a pastor too, every pastor, unless something's seriously mentally wrong with them, loves his church. He loves the church as a whole. He loves the individuals within the church. And you know what? When he sees other people in the church loving what he loves, it means a lot. There's something about, you know, it's hard to have a problem with people who love you, you know, or who you love and who love you back. It's hard to have a problem with people who love the same things as you. It's hard, you know, if you are being a blessing to my children, if you're being a blessing to people that I love, I'm going to have a very difficult time having a problem with you. You understand that? But let me tell you, you hurt my children, you hurt people that I love, I'm going to have a very difficult time getting along with you. It's going to be a very difficult thing. And so when you're parenting, and you start getting love back, you start getting appreciation back from your children, it is truly a wonderful thing. It makes everything worth it. It makes the changing of all the diapers worth it. It makes all the messes and things that have happened and the things you've had to deal with, all the stuff your kids have broken and destroyed and all, it makes it worth it when all that starts happening. And it's the same thing too when you're pastoring a church, when you give your life to something, but then you go and you see people that you've ministered to and you've tried to be a blessing to, when they start doing those same things for the church, for other people within the church, for people within your family, it means everything. It makes it worth it. Then all of a sudden, you're not thinking about that travail. Just like that woman, she's not thinking about the travail anymore. She's too busy looking at that new baby that she loves and adores, and it's a great joy, it's a great reward that comes. And so when we saw that, it was a great blessing. And so in my message, this was one of the things, I'm just going to read it from my notes, but I said, what is the next step Liberty Baptist needs to take? because this is where you are all at right now. You're 5 years into that, and I like seeing other people getting involved. I like seeing people playing the piano and other people leading the singing and people ushering and people helping with the food and just doing things. And I know many of you are involved in the soul winning. And you know a lot of churches that have soul winning programs, it's pretty much the pastor doing the soul winning. And and thank God for those pastors that keep doing it. But you know what? It's easier to go soul winning with people. It really is. It's a lot easier going, especially with a lot of people. But a lot of churches, they're struggling to get people to do that kind of thing. And so it was this part of the message too where I realized when I was looking back at these notes, again, I definitely knew what I was talking about and what I was in for when I preached this. So as pastors, we're all well aware of potential problems and difficulties, but it doesn't mean we have the power to prevent them. Okay? Listen, Pastor Obi, no matter what he learns, okay, and it doesn't matter if he learns from the best and was ordained by the best. All right? And I'm joking. It doesn't matter. I can teach him, I can tell him anything, I can do everything I can to mentally prepare him for anything. I think I think I've spent time in the past trying to do that. But you know what I cannot do for him, because I've never even figured out how to do it for myself. I cannot figure out how to help him avoid problems and difficulties. I don't know how this church can avoid battles. I don't know how you can avoid getting hit and getting beat up. You can't, you know what I've learned now, looking back at this? A lot of the preaching that I did after this, I realized I knew what our church was heading for. I knew what our church was in for, and I did a lot of preaching, trying to, prevent people from committing the sins that cause these problems to happen. But the simple fact is, we're just never going to get people to stop sinning completely. You understand? It's just not going to happen. I'm not making an excuse for sin, but we're never going to figure out how to have a church where sins don't take place. And you know what I realized when I was putting this message together? You know what we have to do? We have to learn how to just work through them. That's all there is to it. You know what Love Assembly Baptist Church is in for? I can tell you by experience in your next 8 years, you all are going to get the snot beat out of you if you keep doing stuff for God. You keep soul winning, you keep growing, you keep doing what thing, you are going to get the snot beat out of you. You're going to have traitors come in here, you're going to have quitters going to come in here, you're going to have backstabbers come in here, you're going to have people that just give up, quit, whatever. You're going to have people that just get lazy and lame. I mean, you're going to have all kinds of problems. You know what you have to do when you get hit? You have to keep fighting.
Amen.
That's what you have to do. You have to keep fighting. You don't get to quit. You don't get to give up. Your children are going to go through difficult stages. Your children are going to have they're going to have accidents. There's going to be days where you feel like terrible parents. Okay, I mean, how many of you ever when you take your kid to the have you ever taken your kid to the hospital or something? Broken arm, broken bone, and and they just like treat you like terrible parents. It's just. It doesn't feel good. I remember one time we had to take Allie to the hospital. I was working at the distribution center then. I had to go into work at 2:30 in the morning, so I would go to bed at like 7:30 some nights. And so I was wearing some ripped up pants, this junky t-shirt. My hair was a mess. I'm laying in bed. All of a sudden I hear blood-curdling screams, and then my wife comes, Allie cut her foot. We're going to have to take her to the hospital. And so I had to drive her to the hospital, and I looked like a hobo. And I go to the hospital all the time, and normally I'm visiting people, and I'm dressed like a pastor, and I get treated really good there. But I was in the emergency area. They don't know me there, and I look like a hobo. And I got treated like garbage while I was there. Just the way they look at me. My wife was dressed up and looking nice, and when I was in the room with her, treat her good, but I looked like some deadbeat dad. I looked like that guy that just showed up because his kid's at the hospital, but I probably don't live with her. And I got treated terrible, but sometimes they do. The doctors, they look at you that way and you feel terrible. And sometimes you do feel terrible. It's like, man, I let my kid break their arm. I let this happen. But things are going to happen. You're going to have days where you feel like a terrible parent. You're going to have days where you feel like a failure. But you know what? You got to work through it. They come. You're going to have days where bad things happen in this church, where your church is going to break its leg. Your church, and it's going to be because of something stupid. But at the end of the day, you know what you have to do? You just have to keep going. You got to let the leg heal. You got to walk it off. You got to keep on going. And so, I can't tell you how to avoid all problems because I haven't figured it out. But this is one of the things I told our church. This is what I was telling our church after the 5th anniversary. I said, this is what we need to do to go to the next level. I said, members need to take on big boy and big girl responsibilities. If we're going to go to the next level, that's what we have to do. The pastor shouldn't have to do everything. The pastor should be able to be gone for a week without there being any disasters. You want to know another great moment as a parent? When you have kids that are old enough where you can say, hey, me and Mom are going out on a date. Behave yourself. And then just leave. No babysitters. No, I mean, that's a wonderful feeling. When you get to that point, that was probably one of the moments in our marriage where it was just like, I think we're going to make it. I think we're going to survive. When we were just able to, tell our oldest, Tommy, you're watching the kids, and it was a great feeling. And it got even better after he got a driver's license and stuff, and he was able to drive him to the hospital if something happened, and we were like, Tommy, you're watching the kids, we're going away for the night. That was a really great feeling. I think we're going to get through this. And and as a pastor, often you do, especially when you start a church, you feel like you can never be gone. Do you ever, like parents, like, I have to be with my kids 24/7. And yeah, you do it. That's part of parenting. It's difficult. But you know what? Eventually they're going to get older. They can take care of themselves a little bit. And you're going to get a little bit of freedom. It says in 1 Corinthians 1:10, now I beseech you, brethren, by the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, that ye all speak the same thing, and that there be no divisions among you, but that ye be perfectly joined together in the same mind and in the same judgment. For it has been declared unto me of you, my brethren, by them which are of the house of Chloe, that there are contentions among you. You know why there was contentions in this church? Because this church was carnal. And because of that carnality, it manifests itself in divisions and things that were going on in that church. And you know what? Some parents, they can't leave their home because they know their kids will be at each other's throats killing each other. And so, and you know what? Some pastors can't leave their church. They can't be gone on a Sunday because they know their church members will be at each other's throats. You know what? Listen, that's part of parenting, but you know what? Your kids need to eventually grow out of that, and your kids will eventually grow out of that. And you know what? Church members, you ought to eventually grow out of that. You know what? One of the worst things that happens when a pastor is gone, hopefully this doesn't happen in my church today, but when all of a sudden, the pastor's not there, we don't need to show up. That's embarrassing. Especially if you have a guest speaker and you're not there and somebody decides they don't need to show up. It's not like I'm not at church that day. And you know what? When the pastor's gone, you ought to step up and it ought to make you more responsible. Just kind of like your kids. Some kids too, they do. They do good when you give them responsibility, and they actually behave even better. That's good. That's a sign of maturity when you do that kind of thing. And whenever your pastor's gone, you ought to be able to rally together, and you ought to get busy, and you ought to help serve. And you know what? Don't get bent out of shape if the pastor puts one of your brothers and sisters in charge of something that you wanted to do. You know what you do? You be supportive. And aren't your kids like that? I don't want to have to listen to him. He's only 2 years older than me. It doesn't matter. Your parents put him in charge. Listen. Put her in charge. Listen. That's part of maturity and growing up. And that's where you need to get as a church. One of the things I said, eventually we should be able to start doing things that we weren't able to do before. So, for example, there are certain ministries that our church, and even still, we're not capable of handling them yet. But we should be able to handle them. We should be looking forward. As members, you should be looking forward to extra responsibilities. Just like a teenager, hopefully if they're maturing right, they look forward to getting their first job and getting a driver's license, and they want those responsibilities. Hopefully you're training your daughters right to where they want to learn how to cook. They want to learn how to clean. They want to be able to be put in charge. They want that kind of thing. But if you have an immature church, nobody wants to do anything. Nobody's capable of doing anything. Some things are difficult. Like I said, just when you're a young family and you have all little kids, just going out to eat is such a difficulty. I remember we used to always like going to Steak and Shake, But the boys were so bad when we would go to Steak and Shake, we were always getting embarrassed. And it was just, and I remember one day I was like, you know what? We can't go out to eat. We can't go out to eat anymore. Our kids are too rotten. And then I remember, and I was like, no, I refuse to be one of those parents who can't do anything because their kids are so rotten. And so we just like, we're going to have to figure out how to nip this. And I probably shouldn't reveal all the secrets that we use to get our kids to behave. One of the things that I learned to do, I didn't have to do so much with the girls. I had to do it with the boys. Boys are different than girls. In some ways they're easier, some ways are harder. But the one thing that I did all the time when the boys were little is I would give them scare speeches before we would go. And so pretty much the way it would turn out, we'd be driving along, and I wasn't mad, but I had to do these things on purpose. And so we'd get to the place, we'd go, park the car in the restaurant, and then I would turn around. I was like, listen to me, you boys, you do anything while we're in this restaurant, you are going to get the hardest spanking you have ever had when we get home. You are going to regret it. And Tommy, if you're bad and Jason's good, I'm taking him to the gas station, I'm buying him candy. And you're going to have to watch him eat it. I would just come up with the biggest threats in the world, the biggest ways to scare them. And eventually they figure out, okay, that's not that bad. It would work for a little bit. And I did have to use that recently with Kelly and Hannah. They were struggling being good in church. And so I remember, and it's easy at first. And so I had told, after church, I was getting on to them, and I said, because you guys were bad in church, you are going to do 20 minutes in the kitchen in the bad chair. And I made them sit in a chair in the middle of the kitchen while they watched a timer on the stove for 20 minutes, and they acted like it was the worst torture that ever happened to them. They were terrified, and they were good for like 2 weeks, but then they figured out the bad chair is not that bad. and so like they were bad in church again. And I was like, all right, you're doing time in the bad chair, and then both of them were just like, and they just went. I was like, yeah. It's not that bad. And so you got to get creative as a parent sometimes. But we had to do those things because everything was difficult. And when you're newer in a church, it seems like everything is difficult. And then you have people that come into the church like, Pastor, why doesn't our church have this ministry? Why can't we do this? Other churches do this. Well, other churches have big boys and big girls in their church. Other churches have mature people in their church. You've got to mature. You've got to grow. You've got to get involved. You've got to stop getting bent out of shape about everything. You've got to stop getting mad at your brothers and sisters in Christ over everything. You've got to learn to submit to the leadership in the church. You've got to be, the pastor's got to know, hey, if I leave this person in charge, they're going to follow my instructions. They're not just going to go do their own thing and create a mess for me when I get back. That's what you have to do. And so, again, members need to take on those responsibilities. And so, as members, you shouldn't be just sitting around watching what is going on at other churches and wondering why your church isn't doing those same things. Okay? And if you are thinking that, I'll just go ahead and tell you why. You want to know why your church probably isn't doing some things you see other churches doing? Because your pastor, who is an overseer of this church, who knows this church, who has his finger on the pulse of this church, he knows exactly how things will go if they try that at this church. We do. I remember my kids, I did this when I was a kid in a pastor's home, and I didn't want my kids doing this, but they just did it anyway. I never taught them how to do it. But I remember, and my dad would get mad at me for this too. Whenever we would plan some kind of thing, or we were going to have service at an off night or a different time, we would all start predicting who was going to show up. We would predict who was going to get involved. And we did it with a really critical attitude. It was just like, yeah, this person's going to have an excuse, they won't show up. And we were always right. It's 'cause we were always right. We had everybody nailed in our church. And we knew. And we knew who the movers and shakers were, and we knew who just the people who were worthless were. And we knew all that stuff. And and I remember our kids, they still do that sometimes, and I have to get on to them. And they start prophesying what everyone in the church is going to do. And it's just like, shut up. It's like, don't have that attitude. Don't be that way. But you know why? Again, you've got it in your mind, our church should do this. And you're right, your church should do this. The problem is your pastor knows the church, and if your church did that, it would fail. You know why? Because you would be one of the people not showing up. You would be one of the people not getting involved. You would be the one person, criticizing the help. And, he would never do this. But again, he could get up and tell everything that would happen and what you all would do. Did you know your pastor can do that? Did you know your pastor's kids could probably do that? They shouldn't, but they can. It's just the way it is. And so we've got to learn to grow up. We've got to learn to step up and to get involved. And so one of the things, this is what I kind of put in the end, what can we expect in the future? I said, well, one of the things we're going to probably have in the future, our church is probably going to go through a drama stage. That's what happens when people start getting involved. Everybody's always worried about what their brothers and sisters are doing, and you got church drama. Biggest pain in the neck in the world. Any pastor would rather dig ditches than deal with church drama. It's the worst thing in the world. Another thing I said, probably going to go through a rebellious stage. And usually I called this, I never told our church this because I didn't want to make it happen, but I've talked with other pastors about it. It seems like it's always in the 13th year. In the Bible, in the 13th year, there was always a rebellion. Now, in our church, it was in the 12th. We did it a year early. But, again, I'm reading this notes. It's like, yep, that's what happened in our church. Yep, that's what happened in our church. And it's like, why did I even get involved in pastoring? I knew all this stuff was going to happen. But, again, there's great rewards that come. And so one of the things I said, hopefully we will mature quickly and eventually be a church that sends out people, that starts other churches or ministries on their own. And so in John 16:21, it's not saying that a woman too, when she goes through that pain, will never remember the pain she went through. My wife can describe the difficult deliveries and things, but it's just saying that the joy that comes from the labor makes it worth it all. And one of the things that I preached in one of my messages, I think it was on our 10th anniversary at our church, I can't remember, but one of the things I said in our church, and I meant it, if somebody would have come to me in a time machine, in 2011, before I started our church, and told me some of the things we're going to have, battles we were going to have, some things that we were going to deal with, I've been like, yeah, I'm not starting a church. I'll just stay where I'm at. I was like, I wouldn't have done it. I was like, if somebody would have came and told me, I wouldn't have done it. However, at the same time, now that I am here today, having gone through all those things, I wouldn't change it for the world. I would not change it for a world. I wouldn't change one thing. I am thankful that I started a church. I am thankful for where I started the church. The Lord has blessed. The Lord has made me very happy doing what I am doing. But again, if you would have just told me about the challenges, that would have been too scary for me. But the thing is, while I did go through all those challenges, I have experienced great rewards that makes it worth it. And that's why, again, if you'd have told me then only about the challenges, I'd have gotten scared. And I'd have said, absolutely not. But now that I've been through it, and I've experienced grace to get through it and the great things that have come from it, I wouldn't change it for the world. I absolutely would do it again. And so the thing we've just got to remember, we can't prevent battles from coming, but you have to endure them. 2 Timothy 2:1, thou therefore, my son, be strong in the grace that is in Christ Jesus, and the things that thou hast learned of me among many witnesses, the same commit thou to faithful men who will be able to teach others also. Thou therefore, not avoid hardness, endure hardness as a good soldier of Jesus Christ. You have to endure it. When it came to everything that caused our church to split last year, I had preached preventative maintenance messages on every single thing that was needed. When I started finding out, too, there was just a lot of issues I didn't even realize were there and problems that people had. I'm like starting to get all these sermon ideas, and I'm like, I already preached that. I preached that. Exactly what they needed. When I didn't even know they had the problem, the Lord gave me that message and I preached it. The problem is they didn't listen. It's just sin. That's all there is to it. And much of how I've pastored our church over the years has been looking ahead, trying to be aware of potential problems and doing everything I can to keep them from happening. But you know what I found out? It doesn't work. Pastor Obi cannot stop problems from coming through this church. But you know what he can do? He can endure them. And you know what you can do with them? You can endure them. You could also contribute to the problems. but hopefully you will endure them. Everyone just needs to brace themselves and make sure you don't get offended. In John 16, verse 1, when Jesus started this, he said, "These things have I spoken unto you, that ye should not be offended." Why would we be offended? They're going to put you out of the synagogues. Yea, the time cometh that he that killeth you will think that he doeth God's service. And these things they will do unto you, because they have not known the Father nor me. People, you know what? You know what y'all just need to brace yourself for? People giving up and quitting. People stabbing you in the back. It's going to happen. What am I supposed to do when somebody stabs me in the back? Walk it off. I had a preacher tell me one time, "You need to stay away from this guy. He's going to stab you in the back." I'm like, okay, well, if he stabs me in the back, I guess then I just walk it off. So how do you do that? Through faith. You know, we can't prevent people from hurting us. The only way you can keep from getting hurt is to go hide in the woods somewhere, but then you get none of the joys that comes with it. You know what? Let yourself be vulnerable. Don't be so worried about infiltrators and Judases and things that you don't, take a chance. Just go ahead, put yourself out there. Go ahead and love people. Well, what if they turn on me later? It's going to hurt. Walk it off. Walk it off. Just keep on going. Endure it. And I believe if you do that, God will bless you. And so don't make the mistake, of just having a church so people can bring you joy. Okay? With your children, you go through battles and challenges, and no matter how much grief there is, you do it. You know why? Because you love them. No one can stop you from being there for your children. You know why? Because you love them. It's not about them loving you. No, you love them, and no one can stop you for fighting for them, laying your life down for them, because you love them. But a lot of people come to church so they will get loved. No, you need to come to church so you can love other people. And if you love other people, no one will be able to stop you from serving. No one will be able to stop. Did you know Jesus even loved Judas, even though he knew he was going to betray him? And Jesus, I believe he was genuinely hurt when he looked at Judas and he said, "Judas, betrayest thou me with a kiss?" It still hurt. It still hurt him when he did that thing. But you know what? Jesus was willing to be vulnerable. Jesus didn't put up walls so it wouldn't hurt as much when Judas would eventually betray him. No, he made himself vulnerable and he took it. And I think that's what we need to do as Christians. You know what? Bring on the hurt. Bring on the pain. Not because we enjoy it, but because through faith we can endure it. We can take it, we can handle it. If we avoid it, we're going to miss out on all the blessings. And so, hopefully this was a help and a blessing. Let's pray. Dear Lord, I pray this message was a help to people, Lord. I pray, Lord, that we'll not be putting our guards up, Lord, but we'll just be fully trusting in you, fully surrendering, and just moving full speed ahead through faith, knowing that you'll be there with us. If we do get hurt, if we do get stabbed in the back, Lord, you can heal. You are a healer. You have the ability to help us through these things, but at the end of the day, just help us to endure that hardness. And I pray that this church will continue moving forward and seeing great things take place. In your name we pray. Amen.